I'd like to start with what you're hearing and whether there's a level of fear when it comes to Ukraine specifically among those in European capitals ahead of Donald Trump coming back to the White House.
Well, the short answer is there is some concern or fear, as you put it. In part, it's because of things said during the campaign, either by the president-elect or the vice president-elect. I don't think things were eased, shall we say, by the announcement that Mike Pompeo would not be part of the cabinet. Normally, a president-elect announces his cabinet choices. This is the first time I can remember a president-elect announcing someone who wouldn't be a choice. And given that Pompeo was quite hawkish on Ukraine, again, it reinforced the message that something is afoot, not necessarily reassuring to Ukraine.
Interesting. Tell me more about what you think is happening right now. Donald Trump reportedly meeting already by phone since the election with Vladimir Putin. He suggested to us, without saying it, that meeting with Vladimir Putin, I think the way he put it was, would be a good thing since he left the White House. So presumably they've been in touch for some time. He's also in the preliminary stages of setting up a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. As we sit here on the 11th of November, do you think that Donald Trump is trying to line up a deal to coincide with him taking office? What can he get done between now and January 20th?
I don't think he can get much done between now and January 20th. The real question is, what's the substance of the deal? The idea that he might push for peace or for a deal is in and of itself fine, but the devil's in the details, or if you prefer, the angel's in the details. What would he expect of Ukraine? What would he be willing to offer to reassure it in the way of security? What message would he send to Russia and so forth? So again, I'm all in favor in principle of peace. This war is going on, this phase of it, for 3 years now. It's been horribly destructive. But what's the nature of the peace? And will it be a real peace? And what is being asked of each side? So we'll just have to wait on that.
Right. Well, do you suspect that U.S. support, military support for Ukraine will end in January?
Well, if it does, you won't get an end to the war. If Ukraine has to fight on through a guerrilla war, it will do so. I think the only way you get Ukraine to end the war, if it's on reasonable terms. That would mean it keeps the 80% of its territory it controls. It's independent. It's allowed to forge connections to the EU, potentially to the United States or NATO. And Russia has to understand that if it doesn't agree to some type of an interim ceasefire or armistice, kind of along the lines we have on the Korean Peninsula, then the United States will continue to help Ukraine. And by the way, Ukraine will be free to use these arms against Russia. So again, a lot depends upon what Mr. Trump is prepared to do. You can get peace if you're prepared to get peace or something like it at any cost. But if the administration wants to avoid doing something that raises fundamental moral and strategic problems, it's got to be in support of something that's fair and reasonable.
Donald Trump has tapped Elise Stefanik to be our ambassador to the United Nations. What will this lawmaker from upstate New York bring to geopolitics, assuming that she gets this job and accepts the job that he's offered?
What I think more than anything is it sends a signal of support for Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. Representative Stefanik is known more than anything for her performance during the hearings with some of these Ivy League presidents, her correctly pointing out some of their double standards and the like. But I think what she brings to this job is not vast foreign policy experience, but clear support for Israel. And my guess is, based upon Mr. Trump's first 4 years as president, that's the message he wants. Lots of votes come up in the UN, and that's one of the places the United States can signal its support for Israel.
Okay, so Elise Stefanik heads to the UN, and Benjamin Netanyahu visualizes what world? What will this mean 6 months down the road for apparently his preferred candidate here, Donald Trump, to take the White House?
Well, what he's hoping is that it means, like the first time around, he has a relatively free hand. He has a relatively, what you might describe as unconditional support from the United States. So he's pretty much free to continue the war in Gaza or up north against Hezbollah in Lebanon. He's free to continue with certain types of settlement activity, and he'll have American backing if there's a confrontation with Iran. So I think that's probably what Mr. Netanyahu is hoping.
Will he be able to succeed in either endeavor, or will we be talking about an endless war with Hamas, an endless war with Hezbollah?
Well, again, it takes only one to start a war. Hamas started this one. It takes two to stop it. Up to now, neither Israel nor Hamas has been prepared to stop it. As a result, the remaining hostages haven't come home. And as a result, people in Gaza continue to get killed. So it's really up to both sides. They both have to agree to stop it. Same between Israel and Hezbollah. I think there's a deal in the north to be had where Israel, would stop the attacks. Hezbollah would pull north. The Israelis who have been forced to leave their homes would be able to return home. But that's up to, a sense, Israel and Hezbollah being willing to accept that kind of limited ceasefire. So on both sides, in both of these venues, you've got the outlines of the ceasefire. The question is whether both sides are prepared to sign on.
I haven't mentioned China in our conversation, Richard Haass. My remaining question is squarely on China. What will be the first act that Donald Trump takes when it comes to geopolitics in the White House, when he starts pulling out the Sharpie for executive orders on day one? Will it be tariffs against China?
If what he said is to be taken literally, yes, that you're looking at across-the-board tariffs on China, potentially far higher than the other tariffs that Mr. Trump has threatened to implement. Then the question is, how does China respond? What does Mr. Trump put forward as a condition for those tariffs being eased? So I think, but that's what we're most likely to see coming out of the box. Much more economic confrontation than geopolitical or military confrontation, at least on our side.